Because I really want to recognize that this is an extraordinarily challenging time that we're facing and that we're in. And yet, as I've mentioned, there is also great potential or a deeper calling to us. Um, and I think where I want to start is to recognize how rapidly there has been this dismemberment of the world that has been underwriting our social contracts, our sense of perhaps stability to whatever imperfect sense that's available to us. A world that was moving after many struggles to a more inclusive space, more conscious, more progressive. So I just want to name some of how that world was, because so much of it is now in a process of being undone, revoked, and erased. Starting with what is the most important in a way, not that we're not important, but we're living on at a moment where we as humans are pretty much controlling the destiny of the planet, or at least some more than others. And that's probably never been the case before. And the destiny of myriad of beings. I don't think we've got the ace card. I do think nature has the ace card. However, we can do and are doing a lot of destruction. And there was a consciousness around that. And back in 1970, there was the movement towards the Environmental Protection Act in the US, the Endangered Species Act a bit after that, protecting the idea of protecting habitats. There was the Earth Summit that started, the Earth Days in 1992, which was the year that I actually got married. So that's 34 years ago nearly. I remember that just after I left the monastery. And then 2015, we had this quite evolutionary moment. Just very involved in this Paris Agreement of actually representing a Buddhist side, among many others of us. It was adopted by nearly every nation in the world to agree, though it wasn't legislated, to um, to respond to this frightening global warming proactively. And I think also not only has that all been really being reversed in very rapid times, the struggle for democracy, for civil rights, for hard-run rights of inclusion for many different groups of people, marginalized folks, democratic protections, expanding to disability rights, LGBTQIA plus rights, protections for BIPOC people, African American, and the Voting Rights Acts, civil liberties, desegregation, and so on, anti-discrimination frameworks, women's rights. All of these are now under threat and being undone in very fast ways. And then another piece that's happening is I was just doing a little research that the the pay differentiate between CEOs and workers is probably one of the clearest illustrations of a hijack of resources, planetary resources. Back in 1965, the differentiation was about 20 to 1. Whatever the worker earned, the CEO would probably get 20 times that. By the 2020s, it was 300 or 400 to 1. And now with the billionaire class, it's thousands or tens of thousands to 1. So we have a very fast, rapid transfer of massive amounts of assets and control and dominance by an untouchable class that has accumulated a mass wealth. And I think alongside this, the international order that was shaped post World War II, this sort of sense of never again will we go into a Holocaust, a genocide, and the framing of international law, human rights, accountability mechanisms to limit state violence, protect civilian rights, post the Nuremberg trials, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Geneva Conventions, the Rome Statute on war crimes and genocide. But just looking at what's been happening the last years, Gaza and Sudan, and there's so much further afield because, of course, many of those rights, as we found out, really pertain more to the Western Hemisphere and never really apply themselves to the so-called global South or places like the Congo that has been one of the longest so-called civil wars, of course, underwritten and generated by the extraction projects of the global North and the capitalist projects. So but however, there's still this sense of a loss of what is actually holding, what is accountability. There seems to be no accountability for mass um, violence and erosion of these rights that protect. So this is all been very rapid, a rapid shift that we're seeing this destruction of a world that was held by agreed commitments, like contracts almost. And that is deeply terrifying. It brings up a lot of grief. I feel sometimes rage. I think this is also appropriate to feel. However, it's important for me to not allow that to transmute into poison of hate. That isn't a very optimum energy to fuel, but it is an accurate sense of what the threat is that we're facing, and this sort of civilizational threshold that this has all brought us to. The Jungian Edward Edinger, who wrote a book called The Creation of Consciousness, talked about the breakdown of a central myth, that we're looking at the myths, because a lot of what we've been built on, the civilization, is predicated on myths that aren't actually globally applied, so that those were left out, those that aren't included. But nevertheless, there was a sense of some sort of civilizational premise that we're operating under, which, as that shatters, as he says, it's like a precious essence or this sacred contract, this fluid drains out and leaving a sense of fragmentation and nihilism. And as I mentioned, what's rushing into this space, into this void, is not only the despair we sometimes feel, or the meaningless, or the lack of orientation, but an increase and uptick of brutality and violence and domination, which we're seeing on the streets in the US. We're seeing it globally. And actually, that has never not been the case. We just haven't seen it so intimately because actually the very nature of empire itself, the very nature of the systems that we live on are actually and always have been rooted in with a lot of violence to land, to peoples, to animals, to ecosystems. So instead of this idea, the myth of inevitable progress and moving into more progressive, aware, evolved states, we seem to be regressing. And this is also a deep challenge, a deep fear that this can bring up, I think, for all of us. Is this where we're going? Just a sort of slogging match for the last resources, and who's got the most weapons wins out? Because that's kind of what it's feeling like. And what does that mean for us all? Just this brute domination being amplified. And this sort of myth of within that of scarcity and competition, the myth of that there's this right to extraction, that humans have right to domination. So these myths need to actually be undone. And in the midst of this cracking, this world in between us, we're questioning and we're seeing so many of the falseness of so much that our world and our sense of human superiority has been based upon. And it's a very hard moment because it becomes very groundless, and it brings up questions, very deep existential questions of what we are, who we are, how do we belong in this world? If everything that was there, the sort of the old gods, as I called them, were there for us, the secular gods of the markers of progress, of institutions that were so-called venerable, the idea of growth, technological salvation, all of these have been posited as, the rational mind. Suddenly it's failing us. And then the very old gods that have always been around, particularly the patriarchal gods of 5,000 years, of course, there was a massive amount of previous so-called pagan or pre-indigenous gods before that, goddesses actually, nature-bound realities in relationship to nature, which perhaps at some point in our evolution felt quite frightening because nature could perhaps do us in. So these transcendent sky gods that would give meaning and cosmology and initiations and orientation, eternal life, rituals, authorities, a sort of a framing of belonging. And these two are also feel like they're sort of not really meeting the need right now. They feel that some of them have kept humanity in quite a childish, regressive state of lack of real responsibility, of sort of like easy passes for the karmas we've created, not really wrestling what's gone before, wrestling with that. So what happens, what's happening in this void, what's rushing in, and some of it is extremely alarming. I've just been looking at all the data centers that are being imposed, particularly in the US, on towns and cities and environment. I was just reading about in Georgia, people having their water extracted, poisoned, their electricity bills going through the roof. These are fueling the new God, the new God of AI, transhumanism, power, domination, surveillance. So and there's no consensus in this. There's no consent from the people that we're accepting this God. It's sort of being foisted, and there's great dangers, as we know. And if we don't know, we should get alert to them in them. And maybe it's not that it is about AI itself, but it's actually those that are programming the consciousness that they're coming from and what they're setting in motion and what they have absolutely explicitly said and positioned themselves as a dominant force. So they are positioning themselves as the new authority, the new power, a billionaire class removed from the people. So this is very quick, unprocessed within the world citizens, and has brought us to a moment where we're being forced into a world that we haven't given consent for. And this world is very, very powerful. It's a world that's undermining and destroying a lot of the protections that were in place. It seems to not be offering a future for humanity because I don't think that world, actually, this world coming in, sees the necessity almost at its worst end. It sees a replacement with robots and AI, and that's been very explicit. Um, and so there has to be at some point both resistance and questioning. And really for us, the challenge is to us is to really re-understand ourselves as human beings in this moment. What are our values? What are we fighting for? What is really important to hold up? And how do we articulate that? What is our vision? What is a counter vision? And I think we haven't, the politics is not really providing, there's bits and pieces of it. the world that we've been in, we have elements of it, but there is a very deep task for us, I feel, to really collaborate and explore this emergence of a different vision that is actually, I feel, seeded and embedded already in consciousness itself, in nature, calling us. We feel it in glimpses. We feel it sort of calling us to something else. And I'm reminded when we just taught a month retreat at the Hermitage at Thanissara, and I founded in KwaZulu-Natal on the edge of Lesotho and South Africa um, a month or two ago, a couple of months ago. And it's a very, very ancient and powerful, beautiful site in the Ukritlamba Drakensberg Mountains. And there was one night that we had evening Dharma talks, and there was one night, and we have the back doors open, it's quite warm there. And so the dark night and the windows and just the candles. So it's less sort of, it's much more closer to nature and much more interaction. So we were sitting, Kittisaro was giving a Dharma talk on the Heart Sutra, and a bat came into the room. And people were trying to do so. Once a bat's in a room, you don't really get a bat out of the room. They're so fast. They have their own agency. And then another bat came. And then everyone sort of gave up and just relaxed into this is the Dharma talk being given by the bats. And then another bat came in, and then a fourth bat. So I'd never seen that before. And Kittisaro just carried on talking about the Heart Sutra, where we had these bats, and you could hear them go past your ear. And I was like, this feels like a really profound transmission from the mountain, from nature, from this, which is so much that world there, because it's a wilderness. There's very little human. There's spaces in those mountains that humans can't settle or live in, and we're right. We were right in that sphere. And I really felt this is the Heart Sutra is about deconstructing. It's like allowing a death to happen. It's like allowing what is dying to already die and what is being destroyed. And we're probably going to lose a lot and see a lot more destruction. And also recognizing what doesn't die. The Heart Sutra is actually taking us upon beyond, as a gate, beyond into that. You could say beyond, it's not a movement to a place, it's a movement, a shift inwardly to what's already here. This deathless, timeless consciousness, this essence of consciousness, this immovable mountain, if you like. And so I was very struck by this message of the bats moving at great speed, accelerating towards walls and then just poof, never hitting the wall, as moving in the dark. They move in the dark. They move from a whole different center of awareness in themselves. And so my feeling was, and I feel into this moment we're moving in the underworld. We're moving in the dark. We don't really see exactly where we're going. So there is a possibility and an invitation to shift our orientation of beyond this separative consciousness that from which we have spawned this moment of great calamity, this sort of suicidal moment, if you like, collectively, because that is what we're watching. We're watching a culture of destruction and death. And it's up to us to birth. And this culture will not allow this new world to be born. They won't allow what was trying to be born to come into being, and it's still trying to be born. So we are the midwives, and we are moving beneath, and the seeing world, in having to trust something altogether, this intuitive sensing, like the bats. Yeah, so that this intuitive sensing you need to listen, to sometimes slow down, to hear the message. Our teacher Ajahn Chah called this being Dharma. It's like the aliveness. The Dharma it is in the books and the lineage and the rituals, but the true Dharma doesn't belong to Buddhism. It was where it was there before. The Buddha pointed to the Dharma. He didn't creator. He created the structures and the map. That's what he created, which is amazing, a brilliant map of consciousness. But what we're asked is to realize and embody this dharma. Now, the old word for dharma, old word, one of the old words for dharma is nature. It's a different law. It's also law. It's not the law of the dualistic consciousness. And that dualistic consciousness that was a civilization for some of the world, but not for the whole world. Half the world was more than half the world. The majority world was extracted from, colonized, genocided, built upon, no rights, no accountability for a long, long, long time, hundreds of years, to build this civilization that we have. So all of this is held to account now. All of this has to be seen in a different light and understood, which is a radical reorientation for us, and particularly for those of us enculturated within the modernity of this world, these old gods, secular gods. And so this death isn't a despair, it's what actually the Dharma calls us to. Ajahn Chah would say, contemplate death often because it's profound. To bow in the monastic training, there's a lot of bowing every day because it's important. It's important. It's the first thing I saw Ajahn Chah do. When I first met him, I was on a retreat as a young person in a centre, Burmese centre outside of Oxford in UK, and Ajahn Chah came at the end of the retreat, about 70 of us young folks trying to get enlightened. And he walked in with Ajahn Sumedho, who was his first Western disciple. And they really had this feeling of having come from another planet, I have to say. I was like, I have no idea who these are, but it felt like a magnet. But one of the first things Ajahn Chah did was he saw that we didn't even quite know, this was a respected Buddha statue. We just shoved it in the corner. This was an iconic statue for Asian Buddhists. We hadn't really tuned into all of that. I didn't even really tune into we were doing Buddhism yet, to tell you the truth. So what I saw Ajahn Chah do is in a great veneration, pick up this image of the Buddha, there was a little table, put it in the center of the room, and then he got down and bowed. And for me, that was the transmission, the essence of Ajahn Chah, the essence of the Dharma. That this is a moment not to bow with despair, not to fall apart, but to bow into the curriculum we're now in, to let the old world as it's dying, so we can hear the new world and help bring that forward, the world that is really guided by the Dharma, guided by like we took the precepts, foundational, all of the qualities that are humane, that we need to amplify and uphold and express towards each other and to hold in community together. The sense of refuge, the sense of collaboration, the sense of care, the sense of listening, the sense of authenticity and feedback, and really finding a different pulse from the beat of the endless marching in this old mechanisms that are now failing us. To hear that in ourselves, in nature, in other beings, in humans, to hear when that pulse is true, when it's authentic, when it's able to shine a light for us as we navigate this valley, this shadow of death that we're now operating within. I feel from that space and really dying and renewing as a practice, bowing, letting go, giving back, we can start to hear their Dharma. It guides, it speaks, it's alive, it's spontaneous. It responds. It's speaking to us through life itself. It's not just in a text. So Ajahn Chah would say, contemplate everything. Contemplate the Dharma. The nature of what's arising, and then that which is present, which is illuminating. Realize this unshakable core, this fountain of presence that's ever resourcing and connecting us to this timeless depth of the actual nature of our being. Yes, thank you, Austin. The Heart Sutra. I was quite impressed that Thanissara just carried on giving a Dharma talk. And I just felt the perfection of the Heart Sutra, not this, not that. Listen again, listen again. There is no this, no that. There is no, the distinctions that we live within come from the mind of naming. We look at a tree and we say, this is a tree and I know it. I have language for it. It's a very different thing to maybe sit with that being and listen, make an offering. We have assumptions about other people, about ourselves. We have a name, we have tendencies, and we think, I know you, I know myself. And that's true, but that's not all we are. So this going beyond the descriptive mind to listen with the heart. So this is a journey, really, as I mentioned in the write-up, not to Mars as the billionaires would have us, to save consciousness. That's so funny to me. We the arrogance of the humans, like I'm gonna save consciousness. It's like, well, good luck with that. I could see Ajahn Chah laughing his false teeth out. Consciousness is mysterious, and we are conscious beings. It's we are. Maybe I don't quite know how to finish this talk, so I think I'm going to just finish it with the Kogi peoples, because indigenous transmission, who have been trying for quite a long time to send messages to us, who they call the younger brother, the one that lost the way, the one that lost the track. Yeah, they put out a few documents, one in 1991 called Message to Younger Brother. And the Yogi people are the indigenous people of the high Sierra Nevada Mater Mountains in Colombia. It was very, in a way, untouched to a great degree by the the Colombian what do you call them? The guys that invaded from Spain.
Conquistadores.
Gracias. Those ones. And so they kept their lineages intact, and there was very, very deep initiations in the dark if there would be so-called shamans from birth, from young age. They live in the dark until they feel what they call the thread or the connection with Aluna. Aluna is the essence, the deep intelligence, the unfathomable intelligence of Pachamama, of Gaia, of nature, that births this incredible sacred web of life. So they would, until they could hear Aluna. And so they were trying to tell us the message in 1991, hey, what you're doing is destroying this Aluna. And then they tried again not so long ago with another documentary called Aluna, trying to show how all the sacred spaces on the earth, the sacred sites, were degraded and necessary through this thread and network of connection for Luna to survive. But what was interesting is one of the things that they said in their messaging wasn't blame or judgment or putting down, but saying this human mind is important. It is not only participating, but it is actually a conduit through which Aluna, through which this consciousness, through which nature is, that we're able to be conduits and help bring forth the wisdom and expression of life itself. So we have this very, very special place, actually, that is something we need to consider. What is the responsibilities of that? And what is the invitation in it for this moment? So, friends, this is a lot. There's this sort of journey from the logic of empire, to call it the logic of empire, to the logic of nature, to embed ourselves, guided by this mysterious awareness that is embedded within each of us and in all sentiency. Even rocks, even mountains, we just don't see that because they're moving at a different frequency. This consciousness, this conscious speaking world within which we find our appropriate, humble, and yet unique place to be in service of this great creation, this great process of evolutionary awakening. May we find that. May all support us in this great moment, flying like bats, guided by something else beyond what we can know yet. So I leave it there, and we do have some time. Anything you'd like to share or question?